Bonjour. Yes, I'm back in France today, and I'll tell you a bit more about that in the episode after this one, because this visit is quite special. But for today's episode, I just want to issue a bit of a warning. Many of us living outside of mainland Europe don't really appreciate the deprivations that mainland Europe went through during the Second World War. And today I want to talk to you about the impact that this area of France had on the outcome of the Second World War. Now, the reason I want to issue a warning is some of the things I'm going to talk about are quite harrowing, extremely tragic. Although I won't show anything graphic, some of the things I talk about might upset some people. So if you're that way inclined, then please don't watch. I can't possibly do justice to the story I'm about to tell you in just one video, so I hope you'll be inspired enough to do your own research. I've used the most accurate data for the research, but accounts do vary. I want to tell you about the role this region of France played in the outcome of World War II during a few weeks in the summer of 1944. The Haute-Vienne region of France is sparsely populated and was even more so in 1944. Although the Germans didn't know when or where the invasion of France would take place, they knew it was imminent. In preparation, they moved troops from the Eastern Front, Russia, etc., to the south of France. One such was the SS Panzer division, Das Reich. Das Reich consisted of 20,000 men equipped with huge firepower, including 200 tanks, and with other units the total force was over 100,000 men. Das Reich arrived in Toulouse on the 27th of April 1944 and moved the 25 miles to their new base in Montauban. The SS of Das Reich had been responsible for the massacre of thousands of civilians in Russia and the East. This thirst for blood was about to be unleashed on France. But in this part of France there was resistance to the Germans in the form of the maquisards, that we mostly know as the French resistance. They were passionate patriots, but were poorly trained and even more poorly equipped. They also lacked unity, with political rivalries often leading to conflict. Realising the importance of resistance, Winston Churchill formed the SOE, the Special Operations Executive, to organise the resistance in France. The Maquis in the Toulouse and Montauban area were already carrying out various acts of sabotage, but on the 5th of June 1944, the BBC broadcast the message, "We will fatten the duck." This was the signal that the invasion of Normandy was imminent. This was also the signal for resistance in the southwest of France to dramatically increase. Knowing that Das Reich would be moving north, the Maquis unit started sabotaging rolling stock and assassinating German rail workers. The Germans had relied on the railways to achieve their plan of reaching Normandy in 3 days, but the volume of rail destruction by the Maquis was such that Das Reich were forced to take to the roads. And what the Germans expected to be a quiet area turned out to be quite the opposite. Although this was one of the most formidable forces in the Nazi army, they had now entered Maquis country. This landscape of narrow lanes, forests and tall hedgerows was the natural home of the maquisards, but was an alien landscape to the Germans to fight in. Once the D-Day landings commenced on the 6th of June, Das Reich were ordered north. Had they and other divisions arrived in the planned 3 days, the Allies may never have left the beaches, but the Maquis, Jedburgh teams and SAS would see to it that they would take over 2 weeks to engage the Allies. But the resistance wouldn't inflict this disruption without consequence, as Das Reich would do what they did best, massacre civilians in retaliation. The first of these massacres was in Tulle, where 40 German soldiers had been killed by the Maquis. It was decreed that 3 Maquis would be hanged for every soldier injured and 10 hanged for every German killed. In Tulle, almost 200 people were captured, and of those, 99 were selected for execution. They were hanged from street lamps in the town. The remaining 149 were deported to death camps. After Tulle, Das Reich made their way north until they reached the village of Oradour-sur-Glane, just northwest of Limoges, on Saturday the 10th of June 1944. The SS encircled the large village to prevent escape, while some troops entered the village and assembled the inhabitants in the market square. The SS said this was just an identity check. At 14:30 hours, the schools are emptied of children and they're brought to the square. And at 1500 hours, the men are separated from the women and children. The women and children are ordered to walk to the church. At 15:30 hours, the men are directed to 6 different locations and they see machine guns being set up. The women and children in the church heard the gunfire. Little did they know that they would suffer a worse fate. An SS witness later reported that 28 anti-tank grenades had been placed in the church and exploded once the women and children were locked inside. Then the village was set on fire. The men had been machine gunned and their bodies were set on fire to destroy the evidence. 18-year-old Robert Hebras was in a group of men machine gunned. Shot and injured, Monsieur Hebras laid under the bodies and feigned death. When the pile of bodies was set on fire, he escaped and hid in a rabbit hutch. He was one of only 6 survivors of the massacre. And today was a very special day to visit Oradour, because just a week before, Robert had died at the age of 97. Far from trying to forget the tragedy, he spent his life giving talks about what had gone on in an effort to stop it happening again. And as you'll see, his funeral is going to be an enormous affair. 646 people died that afternoon, 245 women, 207 children and babies, 190 men, and 4 that were unidentified. The Nazis would later claim that they carried out this destruction because almost every house in the village had weapons, but others say that's absolutely not true. In fact, they say there was no resistance activity here at all. So the reasons remain a mystery. But what's even more shocking is that the perpetrators got away with it totally. Nobody was punished. After the bodies had been buried in the cemetery, the village was left just as it was on that day, hopefully as a reminder that this sort of atrocity should never happen again. But of course it has and continues to. Part of the planning for D-Day involved reinforcing the Maquis and SOE agents with Jedburgh and Special Air Service teams. These groups were tasked with disrupting the move north of thousands of Nazi troops. The longer they could be delayed, the more the Allies could secure their positions. One of these operations was designated Bull Basket. At 01:37 hours on the 6th of June, hours before the D-Day landings commenced, Captain John Tonkin and an advance party of SAS left Tempsford Airfield in a Halifax bomber and were dropped in the Bren Marshes, about 50 kilometres north of here. From here they carried out rail disruption and laid mines on roads. On one occasion, a French railway worker reported that 11 petrol tanker wagons were in a sidings at Châtellerault. Lieutenant Thomas Stevens donned civilian clothes and rode an old bicycle on the 74-mile round trip to recce the target. Finding it too heavily guarded, they called in a strike by 12 RAF Mosquitoes and the target was destroyed. These were vital fuel supplies for the German convoys heading north, so this was a major setback to the German army. It was a hot summer in 1944 and water was vital. The forest camp had a good water supply, but Tonkin knew they needed to regularly relocate to avoid discovery. They moved to another forest location, still close to their supply drop zone, only to have the water supply run dry after only a few days. There was no choice but to return to the original camp, which, due to the shortage of water in the area, had now attracted other units and totaled some 40 men. Inevitably, the Germans were tipped off, and in the early hours of the 3rd of July, the camp was surrounded and attacked. 34 SAS men and a group of Maquis were captured. The Maquis were shot, and Lieutenant Stevens was beaten to death on the spot. The remaining 33 were taken to Poitiers for interrogation, but their fate was already sealed by Hitler's decree that all captured commandos would be executed. 3 of the captured SAS men were wounded, so were executed by lethal injection in their hospital beds. On the 7th of July, the remaining 30 SAS, plus an American P-51 Mustang pilot who joined the group after being shot down, were taken to the forest of Saint-Sauvant, where 3 mass graves had been prepared. Some reports say the men were forced to dig their own graves, but I think it highly unlikely these men would have assisted their executioners in any way. However, they did plead with the Germans to show mercy to the American pilot, Lieutenant Lincoln Bundy, but they were ignored, and he was shot along with the 30 SAS men. In December 1944, a group of hunters noticed disturbed earth in the forest. They soon discovered the bodies. Once identified as the Bull Basket team, they were given a full military funeral and reburied in the nearby village of Rom. And here there's also a memorial to the 3 men executed in the hospital. Lieutenant Stevens had been beaten to death during the attack, but his body was later recovered by a French family and interred in their family tomb in the village of Ferrières. Tonkin was away on a raid at the time, so he and 7 other men escaped, regrouped and continued the mission until ordered to cease on the 24th of July 1944. Well, I hope you found that interesting, and as I said earlier, I hope that you'll do some more research on this. If you're interested, certainly recollections vary. I guess after 80 years that things will change in people's minds. There might be false memories and so on, and people will embellish, particularly the media. But I think what you could see from this is that by delaying the Nazis' arrival up on the Normandy coast by over 2 weeks, the clandestine efforts of the Allies, the French resistance, made a huge difference to the outcome of war. Had those 100,000 men arrived earlier, within the 3 days that they were expecting, then things could have been very, very different. We might not have even got off the beaches. If you do come to this part of France, I'd urge you to look out some of these sites. Certainly Oradour-sur-Glane is the most visited site in the Limousin, and I think it's great that the French have done what they've done. They've treated this place with respect. I know they have a lot more room than we do have in the UK, but I think if this was in the UK, they'd have probably put a shopping centre on it by now, and they'd certainly be charging for parking, which they don't here. So with that thought, I'll just leave you and hope to see you next time. Bye for now. Au revoir.